Good morning and a warm welcome to all of you, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Uh, Let me get rid of some of these windows here and let's get started. Welcome to this session webinar from Digite. Today's topic is getting requirements right for business agility. With this, we are starting a series of webinars which are on the topic of business agility, which is already become a pretty large topic in general in the agile business and in general for organizations worldwide. And this is our contribution to the uh, overall movement, I guess. So let's get started. And I see that people are still joining the webinar. We will give them a few minutes while we get started with some of the initials. Um, so agenda for the day, for the session, we start with some introductions. I'll give you a quick overview about the sponsor, that is Digite, and then I'll hand over the session to Sudip Talari on the main topic today, getting requirements right for business agility. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. Just for everybody's information, we are recording the webinar, and the webinar will be made available after the webinar is done. The Q&A sessions will be done through the questions box that you see on the right-hand side of your screens. Go ahead and ask a question anytime. We will take as many of them as possible during the Q&A session, and if needed, maybe sometimes earlier as well, if needed. With that, let me introduce our main speaker. Sudip Talari is the head of engineering for Digite. My name is Mahesh Singh, and I'm co-founder and head of marketing at Digite. Sudhi and I have known each other for a long time. Sudhi has been in the IT industry for more than 3 decades and brings across a really rich experience of IT, software, engineering, product management, and a variety of functions that he's handled. Most importantly, I think he's really passionate about lean and agile transformations, and has led not only Digite's transformation process internally, but also helped a number of our customers go through theirs. Before joining Digite, Sudhi has been in a variety of different functions. He spent many years in the United States and worked in a number of companies like i2 and HCL America, and just did a variety of different technology functions as well as business functions, helping these companies in their overall IT journeys. So with that, let me give you a quick introduction to Digite for those of you who may not know too much about us. We've been a pioneer in the web-based collaborative products and solutions for helping remote and geographically distributed teams for over a decade, more than nearly 2 decades actually now. We headquartered it here in Cupertino, California, which is where I'm based. Sudipta is in Bangalore. We have nearly 1 million users of our products across the various geographies, and we focus on lean, agile, lean Kanban, agile application lifecycle management, project portfolio management, etc. And our main products that are used by majority of our customers are Swift Kanban, Swift Enterprise, and Swift Ease, which handle different aspects of agile frameworks that you might implement within your organization, as well as help you handle hybrid agile techniques if you were still sort of migrating from traditional to agile. So if you are interested, you can certainly visit our website and take a look at these products. Just to give you an idea of what are some of the organizations that use Digite's products, we have a wide range of organizations around the world using us, and you might recognize some of these brands here. We have teams from maybe 15, 20, 25 people using our products to all the way to tens of thousands of users in some of these organizations using our products. So we have a pretty wide range. All our products are available in SaaS as well as on-prem mode. So depending on your requirements and your own sort of infrastructure policies, you can use them as needed. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to hand over the session to Sudipta. Sudipta, a very warm welcome to you.
Hey, thanks, Mahesh. Let me make sure that you are seeing my slide in the slideshow mode.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, folks, depending upon which part of the world you are joining us from today. Uh, I look after Digitay's product engineering and the management function. But I'm going to talk about a topic today that I think goes behind a lot of fundamental reasoning behind why we fail to get a strong degree of alignment between the leadership across different organizations and the teams that are doing lean agile execution in their own pockets today. So I'm going to talk some of those issues today, and hopefully it will resonate with you in terms of what are some of the situations that you face today. So let me directly jump into it and start by just making sure that we have the same definition of business agility. And in simple terms, we are talking about an organization's ability to be able to respond to change, rapidly. And if you look at any number of the Fortune 100 listed companies every decade, you will see a large number of organizations drop off from this list every decade for the simple reason that they are not able to respond to the pace of change that a lot of the innovation and the technology changes come along with. So it becomes fundamental for organizations to be able to address this ability to be able to rapidly absorb change. And we in the Lean Agile community obviously strongly believe that we have what it takes for organizations to be able to deliver business agility. The problem is that we speak a lot of things which are pretty what most people in their leadership roles will consider it as weird, and they'll consider it as weird because it's very contrary to what they have done and practiced for so many years. So we say projects is a bad term, talk about products. We say don't estimate or do as less estimation as possible, zero budgeting. In this whole literature and the body of knowledge, we don't have really a place for the classic project manager or the project leader or the delivery manager. We talk about the fact that don't allocate work, let people pull their work. And there have been a whole army of people whose bread and butter job for years has been to allocate work. They've done task planning, they have identified what needs to be done, when should it happen, who's the right skill guy to be able to do that, and that's all they've done. We've talked about multitasking is a bad thing, utilization, right? If you look at any of the large IT organizations in India and even across the world, they will talk about utilization being a significant metric that they actually go to the analysts reporting with. And here we talk about the fact that tracking utilization is a bad thing. And somehow we overall tend to give a message or land up giving up a message that we'll deliver more faster with lesser planning and estimation. And clearly, this is very contrary to how the whole software community has been delivering software for so many years together, and they've been very successful in doing it. It's not that they've been, they have not had success. They've had great success. They have customer recognition. They've had shareholder recognition, and yet we come here and actually tell them to do things which is diametrically opposite to how things used to be done for decades together. And therefore, the clear reaction back in the mind is, are you really telling me that this is going to happen? Do you really have a clue of what you guys are talking about and what real business situations and challenges are all about? So what we want to do through this webinar series is to actually unravel some of these weird ideas and cover these through a range of topics, from estimation, planning, forecasting, tracking, to the whole software lifecycle stages itself, requirement, build, deployment. And our hope is that whether you are in a leadership position today or you are in a position where you are engaging with the leadership, you'll be able to understand where they are coming from, what's going on in their mind, how are they doing their business. And therefore, if you need to communicate to them to make a change, how do you need to articulate your thought process and be able to communicate that key point that you're trying to make? So let's start by understanding what is the first starting point. Now, whenever we talk about an organization's rapid ability to change, change to us in the software development world comes as a requirement, right? And whatever nomenclature we use, but fundamentally it's somebody giving us a requirement in some form and shape. Now, clearly that requirement should be clear. The team must be able to accept this requirement when it comes, and it must be delivered rapidly, right? Which obviously means that it has to be something small and complete that can be delivered rapidly, right? If you want to build a palace and you still want to build a palace, you will not be able to build a palace in just 1 month if the original palace was supposed to take 3 years. So you really need to be able to associate the concept of size with what you are going to deliver rapidly, which means that it needs to be something which is fairly bite-sized. And we'll cover these points, each of these 3 points one by one. So let's start with getting clear requirements. Now, most of us understand that yes, before it goes to an actual development team, it must be properly having all the details. It must have the visual, all the visualization. It must have all the business rules, the constraints, the data model. So it must have a full level of clarity that it goes to the developer with. The question is, can we really do it today? Because most of the processes and the templates and the standards and the guidelines are built for applications which decades back used to look like this. And this was far more easy to conceptualize and manifest because you knew a couple of attributes that need to flow from one tab to another, and that's all that you could do. These are very controlled environments. They would be extremely low in terms of flexibility. In contrast, a modern day application looks like this, and it almost is not a single application. It's a huge composite application of multiple subsystems, each fairly big and complex in size, and they have to understand each other's context. They have to understand what has happened before. So if you're going to a hotel booking, it should know what flight dates you have booked. If you're going to go for deals, it should know what are the promotion deals that you're going to the city and when you're going, or where close by you're staying in the hotel. So if you give this kind of a requirement today to a business analyst, there is very little chance that he can really spec it out first shot cleanly and have a full requirement document saying this is what we want and this is what needs to be built. So it essentially has boiled down to today that we need to view us as building hypotheses and systems that are designed on hypothesis and not requirements. And the very fact that we call it hypothesis, it means that we are actually going to design and going into building something as an experiment, which will have a measurable criteria that we can then go ahead and measure it and confirm that whether our hypothesis was right or wrong. And clearly, if it was wrong, we should be able to pull it back and redo it. Often I've seen a tendency to say, oh, okay, it's built, let's stay it out there. But it's cost. Every extra line of code that you know is not working in the market is maintenance cost, performance cost. So it adds to nobody's benefit to keep something out there which you know is not giving you the market response and the market reaction. So what I want you, the first thing to be able to understand is that we have moved away from the world of requirement-based development and we have moved to a world of hypothesis-based development. This is exactly the same premise of the entire lean startup community. They accept the fact that even if you're a founder with a deep-rooted conviction in your idea, you will only know whether that idea is working or not when you actually go to the market, test it out, and then you measure the success and you're able to actually evaluate that feedback and implement the change, and if necessary, significantly pivot on the idea that you started with. The second point that we need to accept is that you will only be as good as the team's ability to accept change. And there are two dimensions to it. First is the work dimension, and I'll talk about it. And there's another dimension that I'll spend some time about. So let's talk about the work dimension. Now imagine a team that is deeply immersed in doing something complex and something fairly big in size. And suddenly you come one day and say, drop it. It's not going to happen. We're going to drop this and we're going to jump onto something else. Clearly, you are not going to have a happy bunch of people, because they have invested their mind and sweat and precious time in doing what they were doing. If you come to them in a very erratic fashion and saying we need to drop something and just get onto something else, that reaction is not going to be nice. Further, it is important that whatever we thought we need to do, we need to build it and take it to a logical point, so that if and later we want to work on it, we can restart it. It's not like it's a piece of trash that needs to be completely abandoned. So we need to be able to work, therefore, in small time buckets. We need to plan in small time buckets. Clearly, if you have a planning in a 3-month time bucket, you would have to wait for 3 months to be able to complete that cycle, unless you want to interrupt everything in the middle. In contrast, if you're working with just a 1 week or 2 weeks time bucket, you can finish whatever was on the plan for the week or 2 weeks, and then go ahead and respond to the change, whatever has come to you, and say, okay, let's get going with it. So ability to create a disturbance and an unplanned ripple effect all throughout the team significantly comes down. Your ability to create the disturbance comes down when your time buckets are shorter and shorter. Now, from the people side, from your development team side, whoever is involved in that whole team, they also need to understand that this is the new norm. The new norm is not that you will have a business analyst who could drive a specification, write a perfect specification, as if that is the only thing that can happen. And the fact that it has undergone a change does not mean that that individual or the team of individuals did not think it right, or that they did not have the prerequisites right. So it's important, just like we are from a planning perspective thinking about smaller time buckets in order to be able to make the impact lesser, we need to be able to communicate and explain to the team that, hey, this is the way modern day applications would work, because we're continuously doing experiments on the hypothesis that we are going to the market with. However, we still need to owe an explanation back to the team and make them understand why we are doing what we are doing. We cannot just completely ignore the fact that they, as I said, they've spent time and investment on it. And if you just drop it off and jump on to something else, they'll say, hey, what happened? Why are we again just switching gears and starting something completely new? So you need to be able to explain and invest in making sure that they understand why this change is needed, what is the impact out of it, so that you have their buy-in into whatever you want to do next. So we covered two things. We talked about requirements shifting to hypothesis-based development, and we talked about teams being able to change and that ability increasing if you work in smaller time buckets and you take the effort to actually explain to them what the change is, why the change is. Let's talk about the third bucket, which is delivering rapidly, right? We said business agility is rapidly respond to changes. Now, rapidly obviously has a sense of value that you need to deliver to the market. Just because I want to deliver something fast, it cannot be something that nobody would like to try out because it delivers no value. So it has to deliver value. It also has to deliver that value with a high degree of quality. Often people take an assumption that, oh, it's going to be beta and I can ship something with a lot of bugs. You can ship something with a limited set of features or capabilities, but you can't ship it with bugs. You can't have obvious embarrassing bugs, because that will just make people who you're wanting to give you feedback say, hey, why am I wasting my time on such a buggy piece of software? And last but not the least, if you want to deliver rapidly, you have to automate everything that is possible to automate. So all the test cycles that you can possibly automate, you must automate, because from one hypothesis to another, to the third, to the fourth, you cannot keep on doing manual test cycles. You need to be able to leverage on your automation investment so that as soon as something is built, you can do do its regression testing in a few minutes or hours, and you're done. And obviously today there is enough technology in the whole space of DevOps and CI/CD pipelines that once something is developed and you know that from a quality perspective it is good to go, it can be pretty much deployed in a very short span of time. In Digite itself, we develop right up to Friday and we make our releases on a Saturday. So it's absolutely possible that you can take development right to the last day of the time bucket that you're working in and make a production shippable release the very next day. That technology exists, and whatever is possible that to be able to automate, one should make that investment so that you are able to cut time wherever you can and reduce that turnaround time. So if you need business agility, to reiterate, we are saying that you must be able to deliver value so that somebody is willing to try out what you're delivering and see whether and give you the feedback that you are actually going to the market for. It must be independent. If you are building something which has a lot of dependencies on multiple work items, then clearly you are not going to be able to take this to production. You will have to then take it through, wait for all those things to come together, get developed, integrate them, then do their complete system testing, do multiple iterations of that, and only then take it to production. So clearly you're going to lose on the time objective if you don't plan it as independent work items. It must be small as possible so that you can deliver it as rapidly as possible. It must be testable. So it must have, it cannot be that if you are building a simple login page, you say, hey, the front end is one work item and the back end is another work item, and then I have to sit and integrate these two. It must be that it is built as one composite work item where the front end and the back end go together hand in hand, and you deliver that login page as an independent, small, valuable item back to the community who's going to give you that feedback. And because we are shifting the paradigm from a requirement-based approach to a hypothesis-based approach, it must be measurable. The piece of software value that you're going to deliver, you must be clear in your mind, and you must tool the necessary metrics as part of your development process to measure the feedback that you are wanting to get when people start using that. So if you build a new, let's say you're rolling out a new UI for a small piece of capability, you must give an option to say, hey, it's an optional thing. You can continue to run with the old UI or the new UI. And I'm going to measure how many people are using the new UI so that I know that, yes, there is an adoption or there is no interest in really taking my new UI. So you need to be able to plan it in a manner that whatever hypothesis you are rolling out as a small scope of work, small unit of work, it is measurable. So with these small, independent, testable, measurable units of work that are delivering value, as we said, if you plan it in small, short time buckets, you will essentially be able to deliver it fast, and your ability to respond to change will be higher. And clearly, if you do as much as automation in your software engineering process as possible, you will have faster turnaround times than otherwise. We will talk about the concept of testing pyramid when we in one of the subsequent webinars, when we talk about how testing has to be significantly looked at differently as far as the leadership is concerned, because lots of things that we used to assume how testing progresses has completely been changed. Now, most people who have been in the industry for over 2 decades have done this. This is how projects used to be tracked and managed, right? Per charts and Gantt charts. And we had a whole bunch of people, we used to call them as project administrators, whose day-night job used to be just shifting around people from non-critical tasks and reallocating them to the critical path activities so that somehow the timeline gets crashed, as if you can replace one vegetable with another. But that was their job. Their job was to just try and figure out how to keep doing this jugglery day in, back and forth, to try and make sure that the critical path can be condensed. The magic of lean agile thinking, and this is so understated within the community, is that there is no concept of a critical path when you're delivering continuously small independent value to your user or to your customer, right? There is absolutely no concept of critical path. So this whole pressure that we used to build, because project timelines would be built over a 6-month critical path, and that 6-month critical path would start slipping, and then everybody would start getting upset, and there'll be escalations, and and war rooms set up. That whole process gets completely magically disappears, because we have taken an approach that we will deliver that change that has come to us in small independent valuable stories on a continuous basis, every couple of weeks, 1 week, whatever be your cadence. The second wow factor that again is completely ignored within the lean agile community is the disappearance of the acceptance phase. Anybody who's done projects would recall that the project would go hunky-dory right up to the acceptance phase, right, with almost as if it's gone on time, on budget. And then you hit that acceptance phase, and then we would have a whole loads of people shipping from one location to the customer site to now support acceptance testing and acceptance phase, because guess what? That's not what the customer wanted. Or a whole bunch of expectations were completely misread or misunderstood. So two things that if I really want you to keep in your mind today as a message to go to your leadership with for selling the lean agile way of working to your leadership, it is this, that hey, do you want to hear of something where you do not have a critical path and you do not have an acceptance phase? Because anybody who's in their 40s and 50s and is in a position of leadership in their respective organization, believe in me, they have spent painful hours and painful long nights in going through the cycle of how to handle critical path and how to get the acceptance phase closed. So it's all good now that we have talked about small independent stories delivering value continuously in short time buckets. The problem that I've experienced that many teams struggle with is, how do we do that? Because if you do it the normal way that we used to do, you're going to get this kind of a work breakdown structure where you have dependencies, finish to start dependencies, start to finish dependencies, so on and so forth. So how do you get past this problem? And the magic is around this gentleman's method called Jeff Patton's method, called story mapping. It's an incredibly powerful, lightweight, simple. I really can't imagine this. I mean, I really can't emphasize on the simplicity of this method, because you can really break down a significant chunk of work that has come to you as a change or as a new BRD saying, this is what we want to do, and break it down into small independent stories in less than a half a day to a day. You can complete the process of release prioritization. You can complete the process of whatever we recommend as an estimation approach, which is a light, simple estimation model or approaches that the Lean Agile community talks about. You can do all of that in literally a day or two, depending upon the size of the work that you're dealing with. It's incredibly powerful. If you have not tried it, I would encourage all of you to take a look at it. And I just took this snapshot to kind of give you an idea of what it does. So most of the story maps are typically a 3-level story map. They would essentially have at the highest level what's called as a business process sequence, or what's called as an usage sequence. You can name it anything, it doesn't matter. These are all semantics, but essentially these are the sequence in which the value needs to be delivered, the whole work life cycle needs to be delivered for the change that your business has asked for. You break that at the next level. Many story maps have at this level a persona driven approach, but that's an optional thing, not a mandatory thing. And at the third level, you are boiling it down to identifying the smallest level of independent value, independent items. And what I want to highlight is take this example to highlight what do we mean by small, independent, valuable. So if you look at this, if I'm wanting to build an ability for somebody to compose a new email, one could think about a whole specification that would have all the capability, right? Email, attachments, embed objects, make it HTML with formatting. But all that is incremental. I could do the smallest value to my end customer by just giving a simple plain text email editor that people can just send it out. It would serve the purpose of sending an email and communicating to the other side. Once I've got that feedback, I can then go ahead and expand it to say, okay, let's add some rich text capability to it, or let's add some HTML capability to it, or let's add attachments to it, or embed more complex objects to it. So what we do is we incrementally keep adding it as we keep shipping it back to our users and our customers and making sure that, yes, we are getting a verification that what we're shipping works for them. Now, most people who are in the leadership roles typically land up asking the question, very common question, that hey, when I'm going to write the story for allowing a rich text formatted email, would I not have to rework on that initial email, on that initial email that was sent to them? And the answer is yes, but you might need to do some level of rework. But it's better for you to invest in that rework, whatever little it is, than to land up knowing after a month of building that whole email capability and then you sending it out and then somebody saying, this is not what we wanted, we were expecting something else. So what we are willing to compromise is being able to actually go ahead and get market validation, because as we are starting from the premise that we are doing hypothesis. It is very difficult in today's world to sit in a standalone room with a bunch of people in an isolated world and just write a Microsoft Word document saying this is what our spec is going to be. Now, while we are doing, so we have broken up all these stories, all these complex email capability into stories, but let me ask, most of you would agree that very few of you would have possibly done an import and an export of a contacts or an update address info on a regular basis, right? And if you look at your MS Word or your use of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, you would recognize that a significant part of the product capability or the functionality we do not use. They are meant for very high specialized use cases that perhaps get used, once in a lifetime or with a very small percentage of people. And the incredible thing is that those edge cases exponentially add to the complexity of both effort, testing, documentation, integration, everything as far as that whole software capability is concerned. So what we're landing up doing is we are landing up investing in a significant part of the software in developing these capabilities, which most people are not going to use. So how do you deal with this problem? That, okay, I have now built my story map, I and I know all the things that I'm going to do, but how do you figure out which is that my customers are really going to use on a most regular common basis? Now, there are few approaches. The Scale Agile community uses an approach called WSJF. I'm not going to spend time on that. For people who are familiar with it, if you're comfortable with it, please go ahead and do it. But I'm going to refer to two approaches which are much more lighter and much more visual in communicating what the prioritization structure is. So from the Lean UX community uses something called the red route approach. And what the red route essentially refers to is the red routes that are painted on the heavy density routes in London for doing their traffic planning, so that traffic can flow through those extremely fast without any blockages. So the red route approach essentially helps you to kind of put it in a simple two-dimensional matrix where you kind of map to say how frequently is this going to be used and how many people are going to use this. So you just plot all these small work units that perhaps you identified from your story map kind of a process. You put it on a simple two-dimensional grid like this, and boom, you know automatically that okay, we need to start with these capabilities on the top right corner, and I can definitely defer putting the building the capabilities which are in the bottom left corner. Now, one would obviously be tempted to say, hey, that would mean that our administration capabilities, which are only for a few people, would get deferred. And the answer is yes. In this, if you take this approach, it would get deferred, and that's perfectly okay. Because guess what? You could take a script-based approach to administer. You could take a command line interface-based approach to be able to administer without building any sophisticated UI for it. So you can still build that capability in a very light manner, so that you don't have to invest a lot of heavy duty investment in trying to build that capability in a very sophisticated manner. Now, if you want to make something more comprehensive than just having a two-dimensional grid, I've referred to something from the Kanban Enterprise Services Planning body of knowledge, where you can actually define multiple risks with the stages of classification. You can then qualify and say, hey, this work unit, this is the risk pattern for this work unit, right? So let's take, if you have something which is a very regulatory in nature, you've said, okay, if we don't do this, we'll have a legal lawsuit on hand. There's very little market value for this. The technology required is high, the business criticality is not high, there's no commercial value. Cost of delay is a parameter which is essentially which tracks how much market potential revenue we will lose if this capability gets delayed, and whether it's hard to execute. So you can map each capability on a risk, multi-risk dimension axis like this, and then you can use a simple plot to filter out and say, okay, if I want to go ahead and select of all these user stories or all these work units that I have, the ones that fit my criteria, and then have the system filter for you the number of stories where, so in this example, 7 stories fit that criteria, and there were 2 stories which match 6 of the criteria, and another 7 stories that match only 5 of this criteria. So you have essentially used a capability of a multi-dimensional risk-based approach to be able to filter out and say, okay, this is what we want to work next, and these are the stories that we want to prioritize, instead of thinking of and doing a very random, subjective, top-down based assessment to say what goes first and what goes next, which is what I've seen most product teams do when they rank something. They would just rank it something from 99 downwards, and then they'll say, but what's the basis of it? What is the approach of that? And what I'm helping you to understand is that you can go back to your leadership on a multi-dimensional axis like that, or like this, that they can relate to, and they can understand that, okay, if this is what I need to filter on. You can give them the ability to say, these are the dimensions that we want to filter on. So let's spend again, people of my age group, and unfortunately have spent 3 decades in the industry, to know that most of people in this bracket have come from a development world where the basic premise was that my user or my customer needs what they have said they need, right? They would give a huge requirement document, perhaps as part of a contract engagement or a pre-sales process or whatever be it. Even if you're in your internal IT environment, you would get a big requirement document and with the premise that this is what we need. And so when you go to them and you say, hey, here's an approach where we will continuously prioritize with them, and we'll get feedback, and based on the feedback we will shuffle things around, we will reprioritize the work. The question that comes up is that, hey, what happens if this scope cannot be completed? I'm going to land up with a lawsuit on my plate. So it becomes important for us to understand that people who have come from this world of fixed scope development definitely need to be answered this question, that what happens if scope cannot be completed? Now, if you have a end user community or a customer community which understands what this lean agile body of knowledge is talking about, that hey, even if we start with a very well defined requirement document, it is only as good as what we thought it to be at the time that we drafted it. There is, unless we go to the market and test it out, we will not know its validity, right? If people understand the basic premise, then you have a partner on the other side who will engage with you, who is doing continuous reprioritization with you, and who would understand that if I did put a 10% team and I invested 120% months, I got 120% months of the most valuable thing that we wanted to deliver, right? So it becomes important for them to appreciate and acknowledge, and they do that because they've understood that that is the only way to make sure right from the first month itself that we are getting feedback and we're delivering value that our end users are continuously telling us based on what they're seeing we are delivering to them. Now, you might have a situation where the customer understands what you did, they empathize with you, or your end user understands what they did and they empathize with you, but they still have that attachment to that great big business requirement document or system specification document that they put their heart and soul into and drafted that. And more often than not, that becomes a stumbling block. It's a block. It's not really the feature that is left out. It really becomes a discussion around how to get people detached from that passionate attachment to that original life cycle of hard sweat that was put into building that big 400-page document. So in that situation, clearly, again, the best way around is to keep them, make them part of the process, make it extremely transparent, make them part of the prioritization process, so that they know that okay, what got taken out from the planned scope, so that we could fit in something from the reprioritized feedback that we got. Now remember, it is their decision, so therefore it is their call, and they are part of the process. They are with you and through this journey. Now at the end of the 120% months, you might realize that okay, let's say, just hypothetically speaking, 25% months did not worth of scope does not get delivered. Now a few scenarios can pan out. Some of those line items could have gotten bounced off the list because as a development team or as professionals who are working on, we did not understand the requirement right, or there were implicit requirements that got missed out. They thought that we, being their close IT partners, we would be able to understand that, but that did not happen. So clearly there is a deficiency in our service, and if you can clearly carve out of your 25-30% months to say, okay, this amount of scope we accept that we can relate to it, then it's better off to at that point of time just accept it and go ahead and build that capability on your own time or effort or whatever be it. If the customer agrees that yes, or if your end user agrees that yes, these were new things that we also did not anticipate, great. In that case, you can definitely go back to them and then ask them for the budget to be able to complete that much amount of scope that they agreed to with. Now there is always a gray zone where you believe you're on the right side, the end user and the customer also believes they're on the right side, and there's a tussle going on between, hey, these things never got delivered, but it wasn't not our fault, or it was, and both sides genuinely believe that. If you are in that situation, my wisdom from all my years in my sales cycle is just go ahead and do it. Because even if you have to absorb the cost, because even if you have to absorb the cost and do it, you will get far more a referenceable end user and a customer on whom you can get far more greater business or leverage the relationship to a far greater degree. You will have a partner who would now understand and go the whole 9 yards of the lean agile journey because they saw you being flexible. So instead of getting stuck on this point, knowing that we have not only just delivered value, but we have delivered verified value which the customer is now using in production for the 120% months, let me just go ahead and deliver that extra 10 or 15% months that I need to do it to make sure that they are happy and it gets done. So if you are in this environment, then those are the scenarios that would come before you and you would need to take through that cycle. There's a worst case scenario where somebody just doesn't want to accept. And I've heard this from some geographies where, or whatever be their environment, without getting into specifics. But if you have a customer who just says, guys, this is what we need, and we don't care what you do. In that scenario, either you can make an attempt, take it, escalate, make an attempt to communicate what you're trying to do, why you're wanting to do, and communicate the fact that, hey, early feedback will only help you. But if after multiple rounds of discussion and iteration and escalation, if along the line of hierarchy they are not wanting to change their way, then the best thing is just stick to the original scope, deliver what they want, and it does not matter. You can still do everything that they wanted in a lean agile way, but do emphasize to them that at least keep continuously accepting and giving us feedback, so that if something is not working, at least all subsequent development we can course correct. Whatever is developed, but at least all subsequent development we can course correct, instead of developing the whole 120% months and only then going back to the customer. A few visible anti-patterns that I have seen. The first and the foremost, which is true for anybody who's trying to get to the lean agile journey, which is the quality of your work. If the quality of your work sucks, then you're plain not ready for it. And I find it time and again very painfully to reiterate to my to many teams and to organizations, saying you need to get this aspect right, because if you don't have your quality right, you're only going to ship out crap sooner and faster. And what you're going to do is that precious bandwidth which your user or customer was hoping to spend time on you and give you feedback, he's going to switch off, because he or she is just going to say this is not worth my time. So you need to make sure, if this is your problem, then you just do not have that foundation on which you can actually start your lean agile journey. And it's extremely critical that you nail this, and we can talk about in one of the subsequent webinars of how one can go about doing this. And I would say, without any shame, that in Digitave we actually have nailed this in an amazing fashion. We have absolutely remarkable results with all the steps that we took within our own development team. Dependencies. And this is one of those favorite things which I often get asking, asked for and saying, hey, does your product support dependencies? And it's as if the dependencies are the most important capabilities that you're looking in your tool. The honest reality is that if you have a lot of dependencies in your work, you do not have small independent testable units. The only thing that dependencies was designed for, that Scale Agile talked about, was to identify dependencies of collaboration, not dependencies of work units, not dependencies say this needs to happen and only then this needs to happen and only then this needs to happen, and build a whole PERT chart and you're back to the same critical path mess that we just got out of by working this way. So if you see a lot of dependencies in your scope, you clearly have a problem and you need to look at. And again, I would highly recommend doing the story mapping approach, because it's an absolute magical way to get rid of dependencies. And last but not the least, I've seen many teams who on their Kanban boards, they put their tasks. And clearly you walk into that environment and you're able to very clearly say that, hey, tasks don't deliver value, the scope of work deliver value. So if you have a lot of cards which are all tasks, you need to all bundle them together into one unit of work and then track that unit of work as it goes along. So these are all the important things that we started with and highlighting to say that if you actually are going to do your requirements right, you need to be able to deliver it in a lean agile manner, in small, independent, testable, valuable, measurable units of work, in small time buckets, without dependencies, making sure that your software quality is high, your delivery team is mature enough. So in closing, what I want to leave you with is that we must start and explain the leadership, saying, gone are the days that we could completely predict in a complete sandbox siloed environment and say, hey, this is our BRD, hand over this document, and now you go ahead and build this for the next 6 to 9 months or whatever time it is. That's not going to happen because modern day applications are extremely complex. There's a very high level of UI interaction, UX experience involved, which you will not know until you ship it out and get that feedback from your early set of users or your customers to get to give you that feedback and help you calibrate that, make sure that you are on the right path. You need to make sure that you have the right techniques. We talked about story mapping. And early in the life cycle, you need to be able to explain to leadership and spend the time that instead of trying to get stuck with a fixed scope and have a situation where the project is slipping, my budgets are slipping, customers are upset and screaming, nothing has been delivered for months together because acceptance phase is getting delayed. Let's work in a manner where with small time buckets, we deliver in a in that planned timeline that we have carved out as part of a project budget with a given number of people, we deliver value that is continuously verified by the business that yes, it's working for them. They're able to get the value that they expected from that piece of scope that was delivered to them. If you are limited for time and you need to catch attention, drop these two magical words. Hey, are you wanting to deliver business agility without any critical path planning or any existence of an acceptance phase? Any person who has done software development and is for years together would have gone through a very painful experience of doing both of these. And if you tell them that I have an approach that can get you past this pain, I'm pretty confident you'll be able to get their attention and at least be able to get that much amount of time that you can do a deep dive into them with them and help them sell what the whole value prop is all about. So in our subsequent webinars, we'll talk about, in a similar manner, we'll help you understand each of these topics of how people in the leadership roles perceive these things to be. How were they doing estimation? How were they doing planning? How were they do forecasting? And therefore, if you need to relate to them to say, we need to work in this manner and change this whole plan way of working, right from the way the project is delivered and managed to all the software lifecycle artifacts, will help you make that correlation and try to see whether we can actually craft a message that they can relate with. That was my last slide. I always end it with this message: absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and adapt it. So please feel free to take whatever learnings that you retained with and then adapt it to your environment, to your ecosystem. Thank you.
Thanks, Suri. Great session. And I can see a few comments coming in about how they have liked this session. Thank you all. So please feel free to ask any questions that you may have of Suri on the Q&A box or the questions box that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. Let's start with a couple, Suri, including probably one of my own. We have a few minutes, so we can take a few questions. Um, One of the things that I've seen, we've been in this industry, as you said, over 3 decades. We tend to age ourselves immediately way we, the moment we mention that,
Right.
is that when you start with a large, complex product development initiative, right? Uh, think about maybe a large, uh, let's take an airplane, a new airplane product, or a large highway. California has the high-speed transit type of product.
Right.
In projects like this, where there is a fairly large scope as well as complex scope, people always wonder, how do I make that process agile? Do I not need to have a very large upfront um,
Big bang
phase?
planning.
Yeah, which is the planning or the scoping or design phase to get my sort of platform right on top of which I can deliver agile sprints or
Right.
releases, whatever.
Right.
What's your message to those kinds of projects?
So obviously any large system needs to be broken up into some level of subsystems, right? So if you're doing something very complex of the scale of an airplane design, you would break it up into multiple subsystems. Let's say a cockpit, a fuel stage, a cabin, whatever goes, whatever the terminology is of that industry. Once you have broken it into subsystems, now there is firstly a lot of things today. The technology exists where you can build these together and really make them integrate in a very continuous manner. So you can actually clearly design it and build it in a manner where you are spending a significant amount of a reasonable amount of time to make sure that at least the contracts and the interfaces between each of these subsystems are put in place. And then you use a modern day microservice kind of architecture where you say, okay, as long as the contracts between this subsystem and this subsystems are defined and put in place, I can now start working within my subsystem and start delivering value and building the capability out there. And once you get to that scale, you can start using, as I said, any of the story mapping kind of approaches to be able to deliver that. But I do agree with you. Uh, there is a lot of this literature around sprint zero and how much should sprint zero cover and to what level of detail it should be. What I've experienced and I think I would like to at least share that is that if you want to spend a couple of sprint equivalents or a couple of time bucket equivalents, whatever nomenclature you give it, a couple of 1 or 2 sprints to make an investment and say, okay, let's do a deep dive and blueprint this whole thing out so that there's a data model in place, there's some level of UI consistency in place, the visual design is in place, data model is in place, architecture contracts is in place. That would be a worth an investment. But once you've gone past that, and if you miss the purpose of time bucketing, it will become an endless exercise and a pointless exercise that you could easily drag and stretch it up to months together without actually getting started with real work. So getting into a life cycle of spending the first couple of time buckets to put that, the scale agile guys call it building an architectural runway. That makes a lot of sense. But the important thing is to recognize and not spend 4 months, 6 months in only trying to just do that before the first piece of value starts getting delivered. So that would be my input based on my own experience and what I've seen. And I think for most cases, that kind of an approach would work.
Great. A couple of people have asked, so let me answer that. Yes, we will provide a copy of the recordings of this webinar, and the slides come along with that. A question from the audience, that as a business intelligence team delivering data, so I presume that this is a team that's building reports and queries or BI analytics type of tools for customers on demand. As a business intelligence team delivering data, what adjustments do we need to make? So what is the impact on them for from a requirements perspective?
Unless I'm once again, I think the core principles stand. You would like to start with something small, something that is independent, something that you know that the customer would want or your end user would want, and then grow on top of that. I think I see absolutely no reason why the same principles that I talked about would not apply, unless there's a business context in your situation that I'm unaware of. But if I take our own product dashboards and reporting capabilities, I would absolutely believe that there's no reason why any of these principles that we talked about, a story mapping approach to be able to build the small independent requirements. We do everything today in Digite, every module from the basic administration to all our input transactions to all our capabilities are completely story mapped. And yeah, I see no reason why you can't do that.
Yeah, in fact, just yesterday,
I've seen story maps which actually expand to over 600, 700 work items, and it's not unusual to see that at all.
yeah, yeah. And in fact, just yesterday I was talking to one of our customers, and they are exactly in that business actually, delivering on reporting and data requirements of their customers. And they use Kanban for prioritizing their work. And one of the things that we are helping them do is implement upstream Kanban. Their problem is to really be able to prioritize the work across multiple stakeholders and be able to give the stakeholders a clear picture of what the overall load is on the team, and be able to make sure that they understand that there is a certain amount of capacity available and so forth.
Yeah, that's a topic we would love to talk about when we talk about flow and how flow helps in business agility.
Yeah, yeah. All right. I guess we are kind of over the time. I'm going to take one more question. And so one of the value propositions of Agile, and we talk about it a lot in our own work with our customers, is that in spite of the challenges that people have in terms of sort of building requirements or giving a full set of requirements, one of the big promises of Agile is that you are, as a customer, you don't have to freeze requirements up front. All of the things that you described in the problems of sort of legacy processes, you had to have a frozen set of requirements, and the requirements had to be signed off. And you and I have spent a lot of our gray hairs getting customers to sign off on requirements, right? And that the big promise of Agile is that the value proposition to the customer is that, hey, you have the ability to change requirements right up to the last responsible moment, so to speak, and also reprioritize requirements. Is that seen as a big pull in moving from the big upfront work to getting more agile?
No, I actually think that's a heavily abused aspect of Agile. So Agile never said that if you know that you need to deliver this, then don't elaborate that properly and completely. That was never the message. Agile only said that, hey, we recognize that it is very hard to build something and expect that that is exactly what the customer wants, and therefore do it small, do it quick, do it fast, and get your feedback. But Agile never said that, hey, if you know that that you're going to need a login page, and a login page needs 5 things, right? Let's say a login, a password, a strong password, a forget password, a forget user. Then you should say it up front. There's no good reason why you would not like in your product management function to highlight to your development team that, hey, these 5 things are required. You can prioritize and say, I want this now, and I want this later. That's perfectly reasonable. But I've seen a lot of, as I said, a lot of abuse and taking the cover of saying, hey, it is agile and therefore we don't need to spell it out completely. I think that is absolutely unfair to the development team, and that was not the spirit of agile how they started with. Yes, they did. The premise when it started with was that development and the user community will sit together and work together. Great. If you have that community and if you have that possible and feasible, by all means go ahead and do it. Nobody is saying don't do it. But there is still a value in putting your thoughts down on paper so that it's complete to a certain level and certain level of maturity before you hand it over for development. And I don't think that can be understated.
Excellent. Fabulous. Folks, we've exceeded our time limit, so we're going to stop here. I'd like to thank all of the people who've been on the webinar and have stayed so far with us to get to the end of the webinar. If you have any follow-up questions for either of us, we have the contact information available here. You would have that in the follow-up emails as well. Please feel free to reach out to us for questions on this topic. If you registered from our Business Agility webinar series, you know that there are a number of other webinars planned. Please join us for the future sessions as well, and we look forward to being with you one more time, many more times actually. Zudi, thanks for a great session, and I guess we will wrap it up here. Thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye bye.